As somebody with endometriosis, I feel like it's a rite of passage to either research or try some form of treatment diet for endometriosis symptom management. If you're wondering whether there is any power in trialing a treatment diet or a fad diet that you've seen promoted online, you're in the right place, because that's exactly what I'm breaking down in today's video. In today's video, we are going to talk about the Anti-Inflammatory Diet, Gluten-Free Diet, Low FODMAP Diet, Low Nickel Diet, Mediterranean Diet, AIP Diet, Carnivore Diet, Vegan and Vegetarian Diet, and the Whole30 Diet, and whether these diets have any evidence to support their use in endometriosis symptom management. Okay, so let's first discuss probably the most evidence-based diet in the world for inflammation, which is the anti-inflammatory diet. There's no formal definition for an anti-inflammatory diet, but it emphasizes eating fresh, whole foods such as fruits, healthy fats, lean meats, and vegetables, while limiting processed foods and sugars. The Mediterranean diet and DASH diets are two very popular, well-known examples of an anti-inflammatory style diet. Certain aspects of an anti-inflammatory eating pattern have been studied in relation to endometriosis. A higher intake of saturated fats derived from meat and dairy products and trans fats was associated with an increased risk of endometriosis. Conversely, consuming an adequate amount of omega-3 fatty acids showed a reduced risk of developing endometriosis compared with the group that had the lowest omega-3 consumption in this particular study. The ratio of dietary fat to fiber was also shown to reduce circulating estrogen by 10 to 25%. So the big takeaway there is a high fiber diet in general is quite favorable for endometriosis symptom management, particularly when it comes to estrogen excess symptoms. Red meat consumption was linked with the risk of developing endometriosis. The Nurses Health Study 2 showed that women consuming more than 2 servings of red meat per day had a 56% greater risk of developing endometriosis compared to those consuming less than 1 serving of red meat per week. Poultry intake was also associated with higher risk of endometriosis. One of the driving factors when it comes to pain and red meat consumption is the increase in the expression of pro-inflammatory markers, which are implicated in endometriosis progression and pain. Antioxidants found in colorful fruits, vegetables, teas, nuts, seeds, beans, grains, dark chocolate, and coffee have a protective role against endometriosis and endometriosis-associated pain. Several studies have shown lower levels of antioxidant vitamins are more common in endometriosis sufferers, and how boosting these antioxidant vitamins in the diet correspond to fewer endometriosis symptoms. Phytoestrogens is another aspect of diet that we can talk about in relation to endometriosis. So phytoestrogens found in vegetables, fruits, teas, grains, beans, sprouts, soybeans, oil seeds, and cabbage have also been shown to reduce endometriosis risk. Reviews show that dietary phytoestrogens have the ability to reduce inflammation and the proliferative nature of endometriosis cells. Resveratrol is a powerful polyphenol found in grapes, peanuts, cacao, blueberries, and cranberries, and it was shown in vivo so in other words in the body, to positively block development of blood supply to endometriosis lesions. Resveratrol intake was shown to reduce inflammatory markers as well. So speaking of polyphenols, spices like oregano, rosemary, thyme, basil, mint, sage, curcumin, dill, cinnamon, clove, lemongrass, nutmeg, ginger, fenugreek, pepper, chili pepper, and parsley contain high levels of polyphenols and flavonoids shown to have an anti-inflammatory effect. Many of these herbs contain substances that block one or more steps in a well-known inflammation-generating cascade called the arachidonic acid cascade. Certain teas and coffee have also been shown to reduce oxidative stress, which can help reduce some of the inflammatory load from endometriosis. Fish has been shown to decrease inflammatory prostaglandins and decrease menstrual pain and inflammatory symptoms as well. The Dietary Inflammatory Index, a scoring algorithm that classifies food and diets according to their impact on inflammatory markers in the body, deemed that the anti-inflammatory or Mediterranean style diet was an appropriate diet for endometriosis sufferers owing to its ability to reduce inflammatory markers in the blood, support positive fertility outcomes, and reduce any fertility complications that might come with having endometriosis. So speaking of anti-inflammatory diets, I do want to tackle the Mediterranean diet. I'm not going to add too much more here because a lot of what I just talked about applies to the Mediterranean diet, given that the Mediterranean diet is the most evidence-based diet in the world for inflammation reduction. The Mediterranean diet, though, more specifically, is mostly a plant-centric diet dominated by vegetables, fruits, legumes, seeds, nuts, and with a moderate intake of dairy products, fish, and low intake of red meat and alcohol. Like I said, the Mediterranean diet is one of the most well-studied diets in the world and has been shown to be highly effective at reducing the risk of many chronic inflammatory non-communicable diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and various types of cancer. Although several studies exist about endometriosis and the Mediterranean diet, this clip highlights the relevant applicability, including that eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, whole food organic sources of soy, fish, lean meats, olive oil, and less red meat, processed sugars, and animal fats did result in a reduction in pain with intercourse, reduced pelvic pain, and pain with passing stools in endometriosis patients. Overall, the anti-inflammatory diet and or Mediterranean style eating pattern get an A+ for me. It is a non-restrictive diet that emphasizes anti-inflammatory foods and lean meats. Overall, I would say it's conducive to a healthy lifestyle while simultaneously helping to support endometriosis symptom reduction. What about the gluten-free diet? So very simply, a gluten-free diet excludes all gluten-containing foods, including whole food sources like barley, rye, and spelt. There is research to show the positive beneficial effects of a gluten-free diet on endometriosis patients. In this study, 75% of patients reported significant changes in pain symptoms with a gluten-free diet after 12 months. Additionally, general health perception, energy, mental health, and social functioning were all reported to have improved in this 75% of participants. The speculation over a gluten-free diet being helpful for endometriosis comes from the overlap of endometriosis with other inflammatory conditions and the association between endometriosis and GI conditions, specifically like ulcerative colitis and or Crohn's disease. The obvious downside of a gluten-free diet includes the cost associated with lifelong adherence. It's generally a lower fiber diet, and the consequences of this on the large bowel microbiome can be quite profound for endometriosis symptoms and progression, and the possibility of deficiencies in important minerals found in gluten-containing grains like zinc and iron, and vitamins like B vitamins. So here's my hot take on a gluten-free diet. Take a stepwise approach. So eliminate all processed forms of gluten first, like white refined carbohydrates found in crackers, white breads, and bagels, and focus on including only whole food, high fiber sources like barley and spelt. If this doesn't work, consider a 3-month trial of a gluten-free diet, like a strictly gluten-free diet. To make gluten digestion a little easier, you can also consider gluteolytic, which is an enzyme that helps break down gluten proteins. This is not, however, an appropriate substitute for somebody with celiac disease, but it can be a helpful tool to have in your toolkit if needed. So next, let's talk about the low FODMAP diet. The low FODMAP diet is a diet that temporarily restricts fermentable sugars, including oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. The objective of the low FODMAP diet is to reduce digestive symptoms by reducing fermentation. If you remember back to my video on next steps post endometriosis diagnosis, I talked about how the gut has more nerve fibers than the central nervous system. So constant fermentation in the bowel can cause a lot of reactivity and unpleasant symptoms that can both manifest as digestive symptoms, but also uncomfortable pain and pressure in the pelvis. Endometriosis patients are 2.5 times more likely to have IBS or IBS-like symptoms, and upwards of about 90% of endometriosis patients report GI symptoms. So there's a lot of applicability for a low FODMAP diet or a diet similar to the low FODMAP diet. While large sample size studies are limited, one 62 participant study showed improvements in pain and better quality of life after 6 months on the low FODMAP diet, and that was specific in endometriosis patients. Another study showed that 72% of participants reported an over 50% improvement in bowel symptoms after just 4 weeks on a low FODMAP diet. In addition to helping control bloat, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal cramping, and food reactions, the low FODMAP diet can also help with visceral hypersensitivity and abnormal sensitivity of your internal and abdominal organs. Some obvious limitations of the low FODMAP diet include that it's very restrictive and absolutely should not be used long-term. Long-term use of the diet can deplete the large bowel microbiome of important bacterial diversity, and this in turn can have very negative implications for endo disease progression and pain. So in practice, I actually never use the low FODMAP diet. I have found that almost 100% of the time, food sensitivities, bloating, cramping, funky stools, and other digestive symptoms are linked to a deeper issue like low stomach acid production, poor digestive enzyme output, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, candida, large intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or slowed transit time. Once we address the root of the issue, the symptoms disappear, stools improve, bloat disappears, and pain declines. I do often sometimes still need to use a treatment diet to reduce fermentation, but it's very short-lived, sort of like a one and done approach. You may not need to apply such a restrictive diet if you kind of fit this symptom picture. The other thing to note about the low FODMAP diet is that it prioritizes foods that may actually not be very good for the large bowel microbiome, like white bread, over foods that are good for the large intestine microbiome, but also simultaneously reduce fermentation there. So a good example of a diet like that would be the biphasic diet. So I would rate the low FODMAP diet as a B because it is highly restrictive, which I don't particularly appreciate. I think it's mostly unnecessary and it has the potential to create more problems if done incorrectly or long term. However, it does deserve some credit for being an effective option for quickly reducing digestive symptoms, abdominal cramping, and visceral hypersensitivity. So let's briefly talk about the low nickel diet. The low nickel diet includes removal of foods high in nickel, including things like tomatoes, beans, whole grains, nuts, shellfish, garlic, onion, soy, corn, and various teas. In people who are sensitive to nickel, these foods may cause allergic contact mucositis, which causes symptoms that are similar to IBS. An open label pilot study showed that a low nickel diet has the potential to decrease gastrointestinal symptoms, but also gynecological or endometriosis symptoms as well. This particular study excluded the highest nickel foods for 3 months. It was a very small study and many participants dropped out due to the difficulty in how restrictive the diet was. Many also dropped out because of overlapping diagnoses like celiac disease, which complicated the challenge of following the strict diet even more. I rate this diet as C- because we're still lacking a lot of research in this space. The study was small and not overly reliable, and the diet is probably one of the most restrictive diets given that pretty much all foods contain some amount of nickel. We're talking about the AIP diet. So there's been a lot of viral social media content going around about this diet. The Autoimmune Protocol Diet, that's what AIP stands for. The diet is based on a theory that certain foods can trigger inflammation or dysbiosis or an imbalance, in other words, in the large intestine microbiome, which can then worsen autoimmune disease activity. And that's based on this very well understood connection between autoimmunity and autoimmune disease development and the large intestine microbiome. The AIP diet is a multi-stage elimination diet that includes a stepwise dietary elimination with a strong focus on important lifestyle factors like sleep, stress management, and exercise. The diet initially restricts dairy, nightshades, grains, legumes, eggs, nuts, seeds, ultra-processed oils, coffee, refined artificial sweeteners, sugars, alcohol, food additives, and pain-relieving medications. These foods are replaced with a list of approved foods, including some vegetables, fruits, some yam and potato, minimally processed meats and oils, maple syrup, honey, vinegar, bone broth, and non-dairy fermented foods. The length of the elimination phase is based on how quickly you notice changes in symptoms. During the reintroduction, foods are reintroduced one at a time, about a week apart. There is no literature on the AIP diet and its applicability to endometriosis, so that's a first kind of relevant negative information to acknowledge. There is no literature on the AIP diet and its applicability to endometriosis. There is some research, though, showing the applicability to other chronic inflammatory and autoimmune conditions like inflammatory bowel disease and Hashimoto's. One obvious downside of this diet is the highly restrictive nature of it. The longer you're on the diet, the more at risk you become for nutrient deficiencies. Since there is a strong link in in pain and certain nutrient deficiencies like vitamin D, zinc, and omega-3, it's important to consider the potential for worsening symptoms with such a diet, especially if it's done incorrectly. The research we do have available isn't showing that the diet does improve disease activity very well. Now, even though my profession requires me to make recommendations based in science, I do believe that your lived experience can be more helpful or impactful than what a research study might tell you about a certain diet or intervention. So I am all for trying something as long as you are well informed about the risks and benefits. When it comes to the AIP diet, as a clinician working in this space, I have applied significantly less restrictive strategies for faster and more effective symptom resolution. So I do think the benefits of trying the AIP diet are far fewer than the potential risks. Sophie is a well-known content creator in this space who is creating content about her journey through her AIP diet. She talks about the reduction in her acne and bloating that she's experienced being on the AIP diet, but I would argue, based on my years of experience in this space, that it's not the actual foods that are being removed from the diet that are generating these results, but rather the overall reduction in the inflammation stemming from an inflamed bowel. Certainly there could be other areas or sources of that inflammation, but if you're not addressing the root of whatever that problem is, you'll go through an entire 6-month elimination or however long it takes you to do it and reintroduction phase and end up right back where you started. If you only ate chicken, white rice, eggs, and oils for 1 to 2 days, your bloating would also subside because you're reducing fermentation along your bowel. But that doesn't mean that anything that isn't chicken, rice, eggs, or oils is inflammatory for you. You're just reducing that reactivity, that inflammation there, and the spillover effects of that can be less bloating, more consistent bowels, better looking skin, and so on and so forth. I'm gonna rate the AIP diet as a D because it's truly unnecessary in my professional opinion. There's no research to support its applicability to endometriosis, and there are far too many risks associated with it for me to get behind this diet. However, I don't want to give it an F because I do see value in trying something for yourself as long as it's done correctly, because your lived experience is very important too. And just because there's no research to support it doesn't mean that it can't be an effective strategy for you. But if you do choose to pursue the AIP diet, please consult with a nutrition professional so that you're not missing out on any important nutrients or generating any nutrient gaps that might end up harming you. Okay, let's talk about the carnivore diet. The carnivore diet is another highly restrictive diet that excludes vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts, and allows only the consumption of meat, poultry, eggs, seafood, some dairy, and water. There is no research that investigates the effects of a carnivore diet on endometriosis symptoms. However, there is research showing the effects of diet on changes in the large intestine microbiome. If you haven't already, pop over to the video on the new research going on about the gut endometriosis connection. In that video, I break down the importance of the gut microbiome and how changes in certain bacterial species have a lot to do with how aggressive endometriosis proliferation and symptoms can be. Diets high in animal proteins have consistently been associated with the growth of pro-inflammatory species in the large bowel, including Biophilia fragilis, Allostepis, and Bacteroides. These bacteria produce toxins like amines, sulfides, and secondary bile salts. Amines can cause food sensitivities, and secondary bile salts have been associated with cancers of the colon, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, liver, pancreas, and biliary tract. There's a lot more that could be said about the carnivore diet, but the bottom line is that the negative changes in the large bowel microbiome with an animal-based diet or a heavy animal protein diet may have some pretty significant and undesirable effects for endometriosis patients. I'd probably give this diet a D as well, just because I'm flexible and I think that there's always room to try something, but I just really don't like the outlook of a carnivore diet for somebody with endometriosis. Okay, next let's talk about a vegan and or vegetarian diet. So plant-based diets are characterized by a large intake of vegetables, fruits, and herbs, and on the other hand, by the elimination of the consumption of meat and animal fats. Certain aspects of a vegan/vegetarian diet have been studied in relation to endometriosis. For example, more than 1 serving of citrus fruit per day was associated with a 22% lower endometriosis risk. 1 or more servings of cruciferous vegetables per day had a 13% lower risk of endometriosis as well. A lot of the information that I shared around the Mediterranean style diet also applies to a plant-centric diet. So in general, a plant-centric diet does promote promote bacterial diversity in the large bowel, for which we have research to show favorable effects on endometriosis pain and proliferation. However, studies also show that vegetarian diets lead to higher levels of sex hormone binding globulin, which can be positive or negative. Sex hormone binding globulin binds to estrogen and testosterone. High levels may result in lower levels of estrogen and testosterone, but if it's high enough, it may also result in low levels of estrogen and testosterone. Both hormones are immune supporting and are needed to maintain healthy bones, cognitive health, fertility, mood, heart health, muscle mass, good energy, and more. So a well-known concern with both a vegetarian but more so vegan diet is the potential for nutrient deficiencies. When coupled with underlying digestive issues, this can complicate nutrient absorption even more. In a study on various diets and nutrient absorption, protein intake was lower in vegetarians and vegans compared to meat eaters. Fiber intake was higher in vegans, followed by vegetarians, and it was lowest in meat eaters. And one little nugget that I want to add here is even in the vegetarian group, the daily overall amount of fiber was still reported to be a lot lower than what you and I should be eating on a daily basis as people with endometriosis. So in that particular study, the vegans were at about 44 grams per day, which is excellent. The vegetarians were at 28 grams per day, and the meat eaters were at 21 grams per day. As endometriosis sufferers, we should be really aiming for around 30 to 35 grams per day. Polyunsaturated fatty acid intake was highest in vegans and lowest in meat eaters. Vegetarians had lower B2 intake than vegans and meat eaters. Vegans and vegetarians had the lowest B12 intake. Vegans and vegetarians had the lowest vitamin D intake. Iodine was lowest in vegans, and zinc intake was suboptimal in the vegan group. In summary, nutrients at risk of inadequacy for vegans and or vegetarians include EPA, DHA, so your omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin B12, vitamin D, calcium, iodine, iron, and zinc. I see a lot of people with digestive issues in my practice who simultaneously have endometriosis, and my major concern as a nutrition professional is the dual problem of low bioavailable nutrition and poor nutrient absorption. If you are somebody who is well versed in diet and nutrition and you know how to pair your plant proteins to create a complete protein, and you know how to combine certain nutrients to make them more bioavailable or to support better nutrient absorption, I think a vegetarian diet can be a very healthy pattern of eating for somebody with endometriosis. However, if you're relying on a lot of packaged processed foods, you don't know how to pair your plant proteins to generate complete proteins, you don't know which foods complement each other to improve nutrient absorption, and then coupled with that, you are struggling with digestive symptoms like bloating or burping, belching, heartburn, reflux, constipation, diarrhea, you might not be setting yourself up for success. Okay, lastly, let's talk about Whole30. So Whole30 is a 30-day elimination diet program that some claim helps with weight loss or digestive concerns. The concept behind the diet is that certain foods may negatively affect health and fitness. The diet encourages the removal of alcohol, sugar, grains, legumes, dairy, artificial sweeteners, and additives in place of meat, eggs, poultry, fish, seafood, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and some fats. Smoking is forbidden on the diet, and similarly to the AIP diet, there is a strong emphasis on stress management, sleep, and exercise. In the second phase of the diet, you slowly reintroduce certain foods into the diet and evaluate how they make you feel in regards to digestion, immunity, and metabolism. There is no research specifically examining the effects of a Whole30 diet on disease activity. In general, I do not promote restriction if it is unnecessary, unlike in the cases of allergies or celiac disease, but I do promote a whole food diet with real foods that limit processed sugars and additives. This diet gets a C for me, maybe a little bit higher, simply because it's unnecessarily restrictive. So to wrap up today's video, what is the best endometriosis diet? Based on the available literature, a diet that is high in fresh produce, herbs, lean meats, healthy fats, fish, and that is mostly plant-centric but not overly restrictive seems to reconcile a fine line between diets restrictive in nature and diets that reduce inflammation and those that can have an impactful role on your endometriosis symptoms. In my coaching programs, I educate on a Mediterranean-style diet with slight tweaks that are a little bit more specific to endometriosis, including the focus on cruciferous vegetables in the diet, phytoestrogens, and aromatase inhibiting foods. As a clinician that works exclusively in the endometriosis space, I have seen the best results with this pattern of eating, and based on today's video, you can see that it is also the one that has the most literature and research to support its applicability. Need support with meal ideas? Check out the Endo Babe mini meal plans linked in the description below, and I will see you next time.